Welcome to Passport to Everywhere with Indagare's Melissa Biggs-Bradley.
Melissa is the founder and CEO of Indagare, a travel and media company committed to inspiring and empowering people to change their lives and the world through travel, while having a positive impact on the places they visit. On the show, Melissa will transport you to dream destinations, share the latest travel news and trends, and introduce you to the most extraordinary people she has met on the road.
Krug strikes your senses. You have your first sip of Krug, it's almost like an explosion, a firework of aroma, sensation. And that first sip is what they remember.
Follow her behind the scenes to the world's most legendary hotels and join us as she explores the future of travel.
Today I'm joined by Olivier Krug, sixth-generation member of the Krug family and current director of the House of the famous champagne label founded by Joseph Krug in 1843. Since its beginning, Krug has been renowned for its commitment to quality and creativity. This commitment is far from static, however, and over the last 30 years, since Olivier officially joined the team, he has ensured that the house continues to evolve while still producing champagnes rich in flavor and complexity. In fact, Krug leads the champagne industry in its ability to innovate and engage. One such example is the Krug Single Ingredient, an initiative that began in 2015, whereby each year the House of Krug pays tribute to a humble single ingredient and invites ambassador chefs from around the world to craft unique dishes complementing each edition of Krug Grande Cuvée and Krug Rosé. I'm particularly excited about this year's ingredient, flour, because Indagare has crafted 3 extremely special itineraries centered around exploring the flour. These once-in-a-lifetime Indagare journeys to 3 of America's most celebrated country hotels, Harbor House Inn, Twin Farms, and Blackberry Farm, each feature unparalleled access to world-renowned chefs as well as epic gastronomic experiences. I'm excited to speak with Olivier today, not only about the philosophy of the single ingredient and these incredible small group trips, but also generally about some other ways that Krug is pushing boundaries while preserving the family legacy. Plus, stick around for this week's Indagare Insight, where Olivier shares his insider knowledge on the Krug winemaking process, what's in his champagne emergency kit, and more.
Join Melissa on the journey. You're listening to Passport to Everywhere. Here's your host, Melissa Biggs-Bradley.
Thank you, Olivier, so much for joining me. I know you are the 6th generation of the Krug family to be involved in the business, and I would love to start with what has been the most rewarding experience during your time as the director of the house.
As we say at Krug, the best is yet to come. And so I think the most rewarding experience is yet to come. And that will be my ability to transmit to a new generation.
Fantastic. So let's go back in the history. The Krug Champagne goes all the way back to 1843. And I would love to have you maybe explain for our listeners Joseph Krug's initial vision or dream for Krug Champagne.
So Joseph Krug was not French. He was not even coming from a wine family. So he was completely pure regarding this industry. And after a few years in Champagne, working for a major champagne house, he had the belief that he could create something that did not exist. A champagne that would not rely on a good year to offer the very best, which in theory is not possible. And obviously he did, because we are about to release Krug Grande Cuvée 172nd edition, which is simply the 172nd time in a row that we have recreated his dream.
That's amazing. If you had to describe what the key to the success of the house is or to its longevity, how would you describe that?
I think the key is the fact that the vision was very, very clear. The vision was clearly, I want to offer the most extraordinary experience of champagne every year through the most generous expression, aromatic expression in the glass every year. So this is what we are working at all the time.
And do you have any favorite family stories or legends, either from Joseph's time or other periods throughout the history of the house, that are some of your favorite aspects of the maison and secrets to the success?
I think I have 100. If I had to pick some of them, I would probably talk about the Krug lovers themselves, the tears they have in the eyes when they share with me the first time they had Krug. And it's always a beautiful story for me because I don't remember my first time since I had Krug on my lips the day I was born.
That's amazing. And I know that Joseph Krug didn't believe in the hierarchies between his champagnes. Why do you think that was, and what made that such a novel idea?
He said myself, if I create my own champagne, I only want to offer the very best, whatever champagne I produce. So he didn't believe in hierarchy for his own offer.
And is it still important to you that the house has all of the champagnes have the same level?
Yes, of course, it is very important, but it's more a consequence of what we are doing than an objective, actually.
Can you explain that a little bit?
What we are doing is about excellence, is about obsession to details, it's about zero, zero, zero compromise to quality. And the outcome, obviously, is a very high quality, whatever we offer. But there is nothing like a brief saying it has to be high quality. It has to be Krug, and the way we work can only deliver what Joseph was dreaming of.
You mentioned that you had a taste of Krug Champagne on your lips from the moment you were born, or just about. But how have you seen the brand evolve in your lifetime? Because even the best things change with the times.
I think when I joined Krug more than 30 years ago, Krug was a very classic maison. The market was very different. It was mostly Europe and America. People were learning through wine education. They were learning in restaurants, etc. Today, the world is everywhere. Asia has become the first region for Krug. Japan is by far the number one market for Krug, and it's a big pride for me because I started my career 30 years ago in Japan when Japan was nowhere. So in a way, Japan is my baby market in my career. And today you have to talk to people who can find the information everywhere. Things go very, very fast. And it's extremely important to be transparent, to be generous with information, as generous as we are in the glass with our champagne, to talk to new generations. There is no hierarchy of age or whatever. The audience of Krug is super diverse, and this is fascinating every day.
And that's fascinating. I'm very curious about how you both preserve Krug's legacy, adapting to modern trends and changing audiences.
I think that if you are not adapting, you cannot preserve, and you become a dusty memory in a museum, very high on the shelf, at a level that no one can get. And what is extremely interesting and fascinating with Krug is that since Joseph Krug, Krug has been almost a maverick maison, always creating, looking for new ideas. All my team are younger than me, and they think that I am tiring because I have ideas every 5 minutes. So you need always to re-challenge what you've been doing the day before and to talk to new people. And this is the best way. And suddenly you turn back and say, oh my God, I've been doing that for 35 years. It's a legacy. But you don't do it to have a legacy. You do it because this is the way you are. This is part of your DNA.
That's amazing. And can you talk about some of the innovations that you have done in the house to make a change outside of audiences and new markets? The way you approach champagne and the way you think the world sort of reacts with champagne today has changed.
I think one of them, of course, was to leave our pedestal 10 years ago when we decided to open the Krug information to everyone. So we decided to have a Krug ID, a little number on each bottle, allowing people to scan the number with a Krug appli and find the full story of the bottle. Before that, it was a secret. What is your Krug? My Krug is a secret. Trust me. Yes, but we want to know. No, you should trust us. And it's not about trust us. People won't trust you if you don't tell them what's inside the bottle. So we decided to open everything. And we created the Krug ID, we created the Edition, we created some programs to make the Krug experience more accessible to people. You know, for example, pairing Krug with music. I mean, 10 years ago, people thought we were mad. And today, people admire what we've been doing with music and even with now extremely well-known artists. What we are doing with chef, it's not only about pairing champagne and food, it is about creating. And you know that this year we are celebrating the 10th anniversary of the Krug Single Ingredient program with Krug and Flour. And this is extremely innovative. So at Krug, we have programs and ideas that last a long time and that always help Krug to keep extremely well connected to the new audiences.
That's amazing. It's so interesting because the champagne has always been known for its quality and its expression of nature, but you just talked about two very different things from the time of Joseph Krug. I mean, going from being a secret to being very accessible and to having these additions and collaborations is really fascinating. How do you think that you are able to make these changes and yet also keep each year's blends one that Joseph Krug would approve of? How do you maintain the consistency and the excellence while adapting?
First of all, we cannot talk about that without talking about Julie Caville and the team, Cellar Master. It doesn't rely on a formula. It's not magic. We have an outstanding chef de cave. She's been with us for 18 years already, and she's still working with people like Eric Lebel and myself, who've been at Krug for more than 30 years. So you have this notion of transmitting, and so we know exactly where we are going, and we know exactly also why we are doing things. Beside that, we have outstanding stocks because we don't rely on the most recent harvest, but we rely on extracts of the previous 12, 15 harvests. So when an element, sometimes I use the music analogy, a sound is missing, we go back to the past and we, among this library of reserve wines, we are almost sure that we will find what is missing.
That's amazing. And you mentioned doing the new editions of Grand Cuvée each year. What goes into the decision making and the creative process behind these?
A lot of things. We know exactly where we want to go, and we know there is no recipe. And it is not about creating the same, because if you want to create the same, you build borders and constraints, and you will have to erase what goes out. So it's an extremely creative process because there should be a space for every little expression of champagne. For example, the 172nd edition is created around more than 140 different elements. So this is extremely important. And this is what we have in mind to make sure that, as I said earlier, the most generous expression of champagne is present in the creation. Will it be the same? Probably not exactly, because scientifically you have to rely on different type of musicians. So you don't have every day the same musician on stage. But if you go as a music lover or a Krug lover to the concert 3-4 times during the season, despite you will not have exactly the same, you will feel that you receive the same, the most generous expression of the Krug music. And this is what we aim to offer.
I love that analogy. You mentioned that Krug lovers can recall and describe the first time that they tasted Krug Champagne. Can you explain to our listeners what that first impression is? What would you say most people feel the first time they taste Krug Champagne?
What I hear from people is that Krug strikes your senses. You know, you have your first sip of Krug, it's almost like an explosion, a firework of aroma, sensation. And that first sip is what they remember. They don't talk about the third or fourth one, which is only the beginning of the glass they are drinking. They talk about the first one. They say, you know, it filled my mouth. It was like an explosion of flavors. It was at the same time very rich, very intense, very fresh, spicy, fresh fruit, ripe fruit, citrus. The words to describe Krug Grande Cuvée are almost endless. And for that, no one needs to be an expert, because no one needs to be an expert to say, wow, what is it? I do remember myself with my daughter. She was 7 in my car, and we were listening to music. And she said, Dad, what is this music? And I said, why do you ask that? I said, because I hear so many instruments. What is it? So you see, you don't need the expertise. It is a champagne that talks to your senses.
That's amazing.
This is Passport to Everywhere. We'll be right back after the break.
This is Passport to Everywhere, and I'm your host, Melissa Biggs Bradley. Today I'm speaking with Olivier Krug about the world-renowned Krug Champagne. Keep listening for today's Indagare Insight, where Olivier and I explore champagne serving tips, picking the right vintage, the right kind of glass, and it's not a flute, and more. Plus, I'll tell you more about our special Indagare Krug Journeys to 3 of America's most celebrated gastronomic getaways and how you can join them.
Passport to Everywhere with Melissa Biggs Bradley continues. Listen to new episodes every Thursday on all podcast platforms.
Now, I want to get into the travel element a little bit. I would love to have you help me transport the listeners to the Krug Family House and explain what visitors can expect when they visit Reims.
So Reims is very convenient from Paris because it is only a 40 minutes ride on a fast train. Krug is 15 minutes walk from the station, even shorter with a taxi. And the family house is a family house. This is the house where I grew up. Actually, this is a house which used to be 3 houses because these 3 houses used to be my grandparents, my parents, and my uncle and aunt house, sharing the same garden. This is very much where I grew up until the age of 20 plus when I left home. So the experience is very much entering this house, which is not a museum. It is very lively. So it has been redesigned the way a family would do if that family was still living there. And my family was not living there a long time ago. So it's a contemporary, beautiful house. The building has nothing really fancy, but immediately you feel the spirit of the family and you feel the spirit of Champagne. You see a few people because it's not very busy. It is not open to the public, of course. It's only private visitors, very small group, 2 people, 6 people sometimes might be a big group already. And you meet these people, you meet the chef, and we have a Michelin star chef cooking at home for us, and he's our chef, and he has a beautiful surname. His surname is Olivier, same as me. You might meet 2 of the winemakers working in the garden with growers coming to taste their own wines, etc. So you are very, very much immediately in the life of the maison.
And I'm curious, Olivier, what sets Krug apart from other champagne houses? Is it this feeling of intimacy and still of the family involvement?
Yes, this is part of it, but I think what is very apart is this ability to offer this non-ordinary champagne every single year.
Yeah. And how is the history of Reims and the spirit of France reflected in the brand?
I think it is twofold. You have this spirit of this city of royal weddings, which is a spirit of champagne, celebration, etc. And I would see Krug more on the austere, a bit austere, and working side of it. You know, a family that doesn't make noise, a family that is working, that is crafting the champagne, that doesn't need to claim that they've done something better than the others. We are not into the competition. We are not into showing what we do. Actually, when you walk in the city, you don't see any big board on the walls of Krug. We don't need to say we are here. And that's the other side, the other facet of our city, which is one of the biggest cities between Paris and Europe. Therefore, this is a city which has been invaded a lot through history. Recently, 100 years ago, we've been completely destroyed during the First World War. So it is a city that has suffered a lot through history. It is a city that has rebuilt itself several times without complaining, just working, doing it, being generous with people. There is a spirit of philanthropy also, but again, we don't talk about it, but this is very, very important. So I would say that Krug is more on that side. And for sure, my family is on that side rather than being on stage under the spotlight.
I think that makes total sense. I would love to go back to something you mentioned at the home in Reims. You have a Michelin-starred chef, and we are excited because we're about to launch in partnership with Krug our Insider Journeys together. We're going to launch the Discover the Krug Single Ingredient. And this is in many ways going back to the importance of champagne, particularly Krug and gastronomy. And so for this series, as you know, we're going to do this small group trips that we have coming up in the fall at 3 very special properties in the United States, the Harbor House Inn, Twin Farms, and Blackberry Farms, which are some of my favorite hotels in all of America. And I know the Krug families as well. And we'll feature both Krug Champagne and Michelin-starred chefs. So it's going to be a very, very special experience exploring these exclusive cuvées and the food pairings. Can you explain why it's so important for the properties to have their own locally sourced food and beverage programs and how that ties into Krug being an example?
I think in today's world, one has to be sustainable in his lifestyle. Actually, this should not be forced, but this should be natural, as it has always been for us at Krug. So it is not so much a claim that we do at Krug, but it's very, very important to be sustainable. And I think also it's a very exciting way to be creative. The thing is also when you work with local producers, as when we work with some of the very, very, very tiny family of growers, is when you are demanding, it's a good word to be demanding. Demanding is not about being rude or being severe or being tough the wrong way. Demanding is about being ambitious. I think a dream can lead to a demanding way of behaving. And when you are demanding, sometimes it's a sign of respect to the producers. And at the end of the day, you have the people who say they are not suppliers anymore and you are not a buyer anymore. You work together. And this is more or less what led to the single ingredient approach. And that's a long time ago. That was more than 10 years ago. In Hong Kong with a group of friends, some of them being still Krug ambassador. And we were talking about that. And I said, oh, Olivier, you are the only one to admit. And actually, I was not admitting, I was just telling my story, to admit that some of your grapes are not coming from the flagship vineyard, etc. I said, no, most of them come from there. But even in the orchestra, you don't even talk about the first violin. You may talk about the triangle. And if you want the best orchestra, maybe it took you 6 months to fine tune the ding, ding, ding of your triangle. And this is what we do. And the chef to tell me, oh, that's exactly the same. With us, sometimes we have these very, very simple ingredients, this kind of ingredients that you see every day at home. And we started with tomato and what we went through, but and when you talk rice, onion, potato, egg, etc., you have them in your fridge next door. And even with these ingredients, we can build the most extraordinary dishes. So this is a fascinating side of Krug.
I love to hear the story of the origin of the single ingredient, and it makes total sense to pair that concept within the champagne, also with working with ambassador chefs, because I completely agree there's so much range in one ingredient. And I would love to have you talk a little bit about this year's ingredient, which is the flour. What are some of the interesting dishes that have been created already to be paired with this?
We decided to use the flour not only for the eye, or for the aromatic, but to go further, to go into structure. As you know, we created a book of recipe with more than 100 recipes from top chefs worldwide. And so far, I'm only starting my journey and I cannot really identify yet my best dish. If you come to Krug, you will see some of them. And if you ask the chef, at first he will tell you how he picked the flour, and then he will tell you what a nightmare it is to keep the same dish through the season, because the flowers, by definition, they have their own and sometimes extremely limited season within the season. So sometimes you pick the flower because of whatever, it's bitterness, sometimes it's crispiness, etc. But after 2 weeks or 3 weeks, this flower is gone. And if you want to make the same kind of dish, you cannot replace, so you have to counterbalance. And you know what? This is exactly like creating a champagne, because you don't have the same elements every year, and you still want to offer the same experience.
And I'd love to know, Olivier, what your hope is for the future of the Krug Champagne. You said that your motto is the best is yet to come, but I'm curious if you have dreams.
In the short term, and short term for me would be like 10 years, is to continue to build this very, very special connection that we built with Krug lovers this previous year. And it will be to see a new generation taking over, and not only taking over myself, but taking over all these roles that we all have behind the scene at Krug. If you look, for example, at Julie's team, the winemaking team, Julie has a team of 6 people, boys and girls. They range from 50 to 28. And for me, this is my hope, is to see these people taking over. And as Julie did 4 or 5 years ago, despite the previous chef de cave was not retiring because he was still young, I would love to see Julie in 5-10 years saying, okay, I think you are ready. Why don't you fly on your own? I would love to see that.
That's amazing. And one last question, Olivier, do you have any special traditions in terms of the way you enjoy your champagne? Is there something, the first taste of the single edition each year, or a ritual of any kind that you, or a suggestion you have for Krug lovers on one of the great ways to enjoy Krug?
One of the great things, if I don't spoil the future visit, is that whenever we welcome someone at Krug, we share a glass of Krug. So sometimes, despite it is very natural for us, people might be surprised at 9 a.m. in the morning to be sat in the Krug library that used to be my grandparents' bedroom, by the way, when I was a kid. But people might be surprised at 9 a.m. in the morning to be welcomed with a glass of Krug. For us, it's very natural, but sometimes after a few minutes, we realize that people are not completely at ease and say, should we drink or not? So we always have a glass of Krug to welcome people.
I can't think of a better way to be welcomed. That's wonderful, Olivier. Thank you so much.
Lovely. Thank you very much.
It is such a joy having Olivier with me on the show today, and our conversation continues up next in today's Indagare Insight, where we dive into champagne specifics that will have you thinking like a connoisseur. But first, if you're interested in learning more about our Indagare Insider Journeys with Krug to 3 of the most celebrated gastronomic getaways in America, head to indagare.com/Krug. Our 3 small group trips, all with exceptional chef and champagne experiences, begin this fall at Harbor House Inn in Mendocino, California, Twin Farms in Barnard, Vermont, and Blackberry Farms in the Smoky Mountains of Tennessee. Spots are filling up quickly, and you don't want to miss these special champagne-filled, one-of-a-kind experiences. With such a connoisseur of champagne on the show, it seems to make sense that we have to ask Olivier to share some critical champagne wisdom, from great basics to great pairings.
Here are this week's Indagare Insights.
I'll start, Olivier, by just asking, can you give us an overview on the primary grape varieties used to make champagne and what you typically use in Krug's blend?
In Champagne, we use mainly 3 grapes, which are Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and Meunier, and Krug uses the 3 grapes, of course.
Fantastic. So what is the secret to Krug's winemaking process?
It all goes back to the dream of Joseph and what he wrote in his diary. And the very first line, when he said, one cannot make a good wine without using good element from good origin. And he said, you have to care about the elements, the ingredients. It's not about Chardonnay or Pinot Noir. It is not even about Chardonnay from a region or even a village. It's about the plots. Because in Champagne, there are 280,000 different plots. And we are most probably the house that, since the very beginning, has paid attention to what each of the single plots could bring to the final composition. So what makes Krug different is the fact that my ancestors said, since I want to offer the very best every year, I cannot rely on Chardonnay this year, because if I fall into a bad year, I will have bad Chardonnays. So I need to make sure that every year I have the broadest possible spectrum of ingredients. And so I will not have one Chardonnay, I will have 100 of different Chardonnays. And so each of these Chardonnay will come from a specific plot, grown by a specific or sometimes the same grower, picked at the day they would be picked if they had to be vinified or bottled on their own. They will be vinified on their own. It's all about the individuality. And Julie Caville will make sure that not only she tests all these 100 wines, and we are talking 300 because we have Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and Meunier. All these 300 wines are tested individually, blind, random, twice by a team of 7. So what makes the Krug process very, very special is the fact that every year Julie could claim that she has 4,000 tasting notes to understand the small volume she has in front of her.
Yeah, it's amazing. I'd love to hear from you how you think about Krug vintages. Is there one vintage year that you love more than another, or how do you determine vintages for yourself?
I think my approach of when I pick a vintage is more like picking a wine. So Grande Cuvée is Grande Cuvée. When I want to have Krug, I have Grande Cuvée. It's always Grande Cuvée. I always have this most generous, expressive expression of champagne. When a Krug vintage, being the story of a year, has different stories. Last night, for example, we had with friends in Italy, we had side by side Krug 2008 and Krug 2002. And they were very different. And probably myself, if I had to open only one of the two, I will think about it. I will say, okay, I would say maybe 2002 because it's a bit bolder and richer, would go with something, or maybe even a personality, which is slightly bolder. 2008 because of this very, very specific finesse, elegance, this almost a laser beam freshness.
So, Olivier, can I ask you, what do you think the best way to enjoy champagne is?
A real champagne lover always has a champagne in the cooler, in the fridge, or in the wine cellar. Always, always, always. And there is no excuse to open a bottle of champagne. You open champagne with people you love. It's not because it's a celebration or whatever, birthday or whatever. And then, of course, you need a proper glass.
So that leads me to ask you, what is the proper glass? What do you think? Is it a flute? Is it a coupe?
You cannot play Krug in a flute because nothing will be revealed. You need the proper glass. So for Krug, we have designed our own glass called the Joseph glass, as if my ancestor was coming back and designing his own glass. But if you don't have it, you have some very, very good Chardonnay glasses in the market from the good producers that can make it. But for sure, never ever drink champagne from a flute or from a coupe.
That's great advice. What is the best temperature? It's not too cold.
For me, it's a Celsius. It's not below 9 for sure. And for me, it's around 11 or 12 Celsius.
Okay. And do you have a favorite food to eat with Krug?
I have like a little guilty pleasure. I just put in my kitchen some Parmigiano, which I bought this morning near Padova. So I love when this is my emergency kit. If someone is coming, I always have a bottle of Cuvée. Few glasses are not far. And if I don't have time to cook or prepare, we have this old Parmigiano, and that makes the job. Otherwise, a champagne like Krug, by definition, is super versatile. This is probably the most versatile wine that one has on a wine list. When I talk to my friends sommeliers, they say, when I am trapped because 3 or 4 people are eating different dishes and I don't know which wine to recommend, I will always go for Krug because there is no other champagne or wine that can offer so much. So Krug offers a very, very broad spectrum of pairings and creativity, of course.
That's another reason why you have to have a bottle of Krug in your refrigerator always.
Always, as an emergency kit.
I love that. Well, thank you so much, Olivier. This is super helpful. I love getting your answers, and I learned a lot from Parmesan to the right glasses. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Many thanks to Olivier for our lovely conversation today, exploring Krug Champagne and its role in redefining the standards of winemaking. I hope you learned something exciting as you pop open your next bottle, whatever the occasion may be. To learn more about Krug and to shop the champagne, head to krug.com and follow the label on Instagram at Krug Champagne. Coming up on Passport to Everywhere, I'll be speaking with fashion designer Trina Turk about her vibrant namesake brand and its California influence, as well as tips for the ultimate California road trip. Hope you'll tune in next week. Be sure to rate and review us wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for joining the journey.
Thank you for joining us at Passport to Everywhere.
We hope you'll join the journey and subscribe. For more travel inspiration, visit indagare.com. Indagare. This has been Passport to Everywhere.